Hi, I'm Debbie. I'm head of teen services at the Gum Spring Library in Aldie, Virginia. And I'm here to talk to you a little bit today about some ideas that you can use to kind of strengthen your plot as you're writing a short story. And the reason I'm doing this is because we are hosting our annual short story competition for middle and high school students starting January 1st and going all the way to March 1st. So this competition is to write a short story. I think it's under 2,500 words. You can find more details by going to library.loudoun.gov/IAW. But without further ado, we're going to talk today a little bit about some of these plot tips. All right, so first thing to remember, short stories are short. You are not asked to write a novel or anything. We're looking, again, for something that is 2,500 words or under. So think about something that is maybe like 1 to 3 scenes long. So you can do something that is a little bit longer, maybe has a couple more shorter scenes if you want to. But we found that some of the more successful stories are either like just 1 scene or maybe 2 or 3 if you're looking to have a little bit more scope. There are a few stories that we've seen that do kind of like a montage of scenes. One of my favorites was from this last year. It was kind of an apocalyptic story, and in it the author talked about like what was happening every day, but just in terms of like every day this is how it goes, and it worked really well for that one just because I think you get the sense of the monotony. So like that the same thing is happening every day, day after day. So it was really well done. But if you are kind of new to doing a short story, think of doing maybe like 1 to 3 scenes that will kind of encompass the whole story from the start to the finish. So if you are writing a novel and you wanted to submit like a piece of that, that is absolutely acceptable. We have had stories previously that won that were just a piece of a larger story. It is very tricky, I have to warn you. There was one that I specifically remember that was a sword fight between 2 women who were like masters of the blade. And it did like start with them starting this fight and then resolve with them finishing the fight. So just think about like how it's going to start, how that scene is going to start and then finish. So the plot can be a little bit open-ended. We don't know what happened after that sword fight, but it was still resolved. It worked really well together. So this is why, like, kind of a scene, thinking of it as a scene, it works really well. And I'd recommend, if you're thinking of it as a scene, maybe think of it as either the second scene in your book or the second to last scene in your book. So what I mean by that, like a second scene would be maybe like 2 enemies decide to work together to rob a bank because they both really need money. So you don't have like that necessarily that action scene of them robbing the bank, but you would have that scene of them like kind of overcoming their differences in order to agree to work together. And so it can still be a little open-ended. You don't know if one of them is going to betray the other one, but you still have that resolution of them making that decision to work together. An example of like a second to last scene would be maybe after years of planning, like a military group finally overthrows a tyrant. So it does kind of like finish the story, but it's a little open-ended too. Like you don't know who's going to take the throne next. You don't know if it's going to become like if this nation's going to become a democracy. What is the plan for like what happens next? It can still be a little open-ended, but you have that scene of like this, years of planning happened, and then boom, this is the action scene. We're fighting against this bad guy, and then it ends like right when that defeat happens. So you still have that beginning, middle, and end. So one thing that you can do to kind of like help your story a little bit too is by giving it kind of a familiar circumstance or setting. So in the case of like the group overthrowing a tyrant, Like that's a fairly common thing that happens, especially in like a dystopian novel. So you have that kind of like basic framework, but you decide what you want to do with all the specifics around it. So for example, like, is your tyrant a little girl with a teddy bear? You know, what is the thing that needs to be overthrown? Or in the case of something like a retold fairy tale, do you want to tell it from like a villain perspective? Or do you know, if you want to tell like a story that's similar to Harry Potter, like the whole magic rules and everything, that all of that is pretty creative, but the school piece is still something that's very familiar, the like having friends, fighting with your friends, that kind of thing. That's still a fairly familiar story. So I just need to make a note here too, for those of you who are going to submit a story, we are not looking for fan fiction. So if there's something like Harry Potter out there that you want to write a story about, great. This is maybe not the place to do it, but you can absolutely write about your own magical school that you design like the rules for, and decide what you want to do with that. You can also take like a fairy tale and try to retell it. We don't consider that being unoriginal. It can be extremely original. If you think of something like Maleficent, you know, like that's an extremely original story of like a traditional fairy tale, but told from a different point of view, with a few twists in it. So try to be as original as possible with your world, but you can give something like a familiar setting, or in the case of something like Maleficent, even a fairly familiar plot. All right, next thing would be to kind of cut out a lot of your setup. So I know a lot of times when we're starting to write a story, we want to describe the world as much as possible, or at least I do. But in this case, for a short story, you're going to want to cut right down to your scene, like the scene that you want to do, or the couple of scenes that you want to do. So for example, you could say, let's go with the idea of a magical school. So if you're saying, oh, this city, Olia, is very beautiful. It's on a harbor. All of the buildings are made out of sandstone. The sun is always bright there, and there's a magical university in that town. You can kind of cut that out a little bit for your short story. We don't need a ton of explanation. What you can do is kind of jump right into like that personal connection. So you can say, you know, Sana was such a good witch. All of her classes, she was like the best. She was a star witch. And then all of a sudden, a competitor showed up that was starting to overtake her. So what does she do next? So that's just an example of like something that you could do for that. All right. And last piece is show, don't tell. I don't know if you've heard this advice before, but it's a pretty common piece of advice for people who are writing either like stories. So like, you know, even film, TV, but also, you know, regular stories, is show, don't tell. So an example of telling would be saying something like, Casey was really tired when she came home. An example of showing that would be like Casey stumbled home. Her head was filled with thoughts of her fluffy bed. So think of that one, gives you a few more words, I think. So, you know, if you're trying to cut down, there's probably something you can do to make it a little bit shorter even than that. But it allows you to get into the moment a little bit more. All right, well, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope this is helpful to you. If it's not, that's fine. Like, go ahead and write what's in your heart. If you have an idea for a story that kind of breaks the rules, go ahead and break it. All of these are just tips for what we've seen about stories that are fairly successful for It's All Right. But we have definitely had stories that break every single one of these rules. So good luck, be creative, have fun, and we are really, really looking forward to reading your stories. If you have any questions, feel free to contact your local Loudoun County Public Library. You can also check out the website for It's All Right at library.loudoun.gov/IAW. That stands for It's All Right. So thank you so much. We'll see you later. Bye.